All right, folks, welcome to Omega Man Radio. Tonight is a special broadcast. I know you've been waiting for it. The night has finally arrived. We're going to have Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Chris Putnam on tonight. We're talking about Petrus Romanus, the final pope in the Annunciation of the Antichrist. Now, let me make just a couple quick announcements. We're streaming right now in CD quality audio over at OmegaManRadio.com. So what that means for you is if you open up two windows, in your main window you can have your Blog Talk chat over there. You want to make sure you mute the player in that window, and then in the second window, go to OmegaManRadio.com, and you can hear super high-fidelity audio tonight. We're doing something we've never done before with Steve Quayle. We've got him set up on Skype, and this is going to be a great broadcast tonight. So we welcome you here if you're here for the first time. Later on in the program, we're going to be taking your live calls. Now, the number to dial in tonight, if you'd like to speak to these guests, will be 917-889-2745. Again, 917-889-2745. Later in the program, we'll open up those phone lines. Let's get started. Welcome aboard, gentlemen. I'm going to have you announce your names and your contact info, please, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's broadcast. This is a time-vaulted or opening of a time lock for information that has been kept, if you will, secret, hidden, almost to the point where now it can be told, now it can be spoken, and I'll let Tom and Chris address that. My name is Steve Quayle. I'm going to moderate, but the experts tonight are Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. We're going to bring Chris on first. So my contact information is stevequayle.com, stevequayle.com. For those of you that are listening in, when you're going to ask your questions, I'm going to ask that you direct them to the specific speaker. And because Tom and I have done this, and it's kind of a refreshing thing, I was speaking on the radio prior, or actually in the chat room, prior to everybody coming on when we officially went on at 7 Mountain, telling Tom, I said, Tom, it's interesting that it's fascinating that Chris will be joining us, and this information is some of the information that I believe Daniel was showing, the whole end-time panorama of how everything plays out. If there's anything that's important, ladies and gentlemen, it's to understand the nature of the battle, the players in the battle, and how this will affect the lives of almost, just in the United States alone, 70 million Catholics, but also it's going to affect everybody on the planet. So we're going to bring on this topic. And by the way, you're going to hear from the two co-authors of the book that they've just written, The Final Pope is Here, Petrus Romanus. And with no further ado, I want to bring on Chris Putnam. First of all, Chris, nice to talk to you. I've never spoken to you before, but I'm aware of your research. And would you just go ahead and share with people kind of what you've been doing, what prompted you to sync up and link up with Tom to put out this amazing work? And I just want you to take your time. There's no hurry. We've got 4 hours, and you guys, the 4 hours we've got without breaks outside of one break at the top of the hour, just so you know, this is the equivalent of 8 hours of broadcasting. So I believe that God is doubling unto the doubles, and I think He's really wanting tonight for the truth of what's getting ready to happen. Everyone should seek the Lord, and if you don't understand something, ask the Lord Jesus to give you understanding. So please, Chris, share about yourself, share about your ministry, and what prompted you to contact Tom or whoever contacted you to bring about this work.
Well, certainly. Thank you very much, Steve, for that kind introduction. I'm a dedicated student of the Bible and theology now. I wasn't for a lot of my life. I was a skeptic. I really didn't believe Christianity. I kind of thought it was a crutch for weak people, for people who are afraid of death. And, you know, I walked around with those ideas, and a lot of those ideas were really kind of the fuel that allowed me to sin and not feel guilty about it. And, you know, about 12 years ago, the Lord brought all that to a head and brought me to my knees. And I surrendered. And once I did, I started to get a hunger for the Word of God and the things of God. And I really became a dedicated student of the Bible. And, you know, getting on the Internet, I'd gotten into computer science as a career at the time. And I discovered Chuck Missler tapes and firefighters.org and places like that. And I started really listening to Chuck and getting into prophecy and things like that. And, you know, as I did that, it just kind of, the ball started rolling downhill, and apologetics became a really strong interest. And I studied, and the more I studied, the more I found out that not only is Christianity true, there are really good reasons to believe that it's true. And not only are there good reasons to believe it's true, it's really the best, most coherent worldview that you can hold. I mean, it explains reality better than other worldviews. You know, I've dealt with a lot of atheists and naturalistic scientist-type people. I kind of started from that framework and debated creation and scientific topics for a number of years when I was a young Christian, and that really gave me a foundation in truth and some philosophy and the reasons why it's true. And then the further I went, I kind of wanted to get into more of doctrinal things and theology. So I actually went to seminary, and I just finished a master's degree in theological studies last year. And during that process, you know, I became interested in a lot of the kind of topics that Tom covers over at Raiders, and I would, you know, frequent the Raiders site, and I happened to see that Tom put out this letter to Christian leaders about transhumanism. And the transhumanism thing really fascinated me because of my background in science and computer science and technology. I understood a lot of where that was going. And I was actually in a systematic theology class in the seminary at the time, and I had to do a research project for that course. And I decided to do it on transhumanism. And that paper is actually published over at Tom's site right now. And it ended up being a chapter in the book, Pandemonium's Engine. That's how I met Tom, basically. I started corresponding with him when I wrote that paper. And it started out as a seminary paper. And I really kind of took the naturalistic worldview to task. And there's people that call themselves Christians that are advocating a thing called Christian transhumanism. And, you know, I could see the flagrant errors as far as biblical theology. They were, you know, all through the kind of arguments that those people were making, really based on theological liberalism and a real kind of postmodern view of God and pluralism. And anyway, so I kind of took that to task in that paper, and that's how I developed a relationship with Tom. And Tom is linked to a lot of my articles on my apologetics site, which is www.logosapologia. It's LOGOSAPOLOGIA.org on the internet. And so we've had an email relationship going on for the last 2 years probably. And we were, you know, been talking about prophecy and some of the things we were going back and forth, and we both got on this topic of the prophecy of the popes. And the thing that you just can't get around with the prophecy of the popes is that the next pope's the last one. I mean, that is a fact, whether it's a real prophecy, whether you buy it or not. The fact of the matter is a lot of people do buy it, and there's only one left, one way or the other. We're going to find out if it's true or not. And, you know, the thing that's interesting about it is that there are some really remarkable fulfillments, and we can talk about those more later, but there's really compelling reasons that made the project interesting. But as, you know, we decided to look into it and started researching, Tom and I both discovered that we kind of opened a can of worms we didn't expect. And there's much more compelling reasons than we ever believed at first. And, you know, we'll talk about those more as we go along. But, I mean, it's been a pleasure to work on this book. We've been working almost nonstop since November. It was really written pretty quickly, but I mean, I've been working 14, 16-hour days all throughout Christmas this whole time to get this book done, because some of the information that we've uncovered, and I'm going to post some on my website tonight for your listeners to see, is so time sensitive that if we don't get this book out by April, no one's going to believe us, because if it happens the way it's predicted, we need to get the book in print as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let Tom talk a little bit about what he's been doing with it, and we can talk more about those specifics and more about what I uncovered on the research of the prophecy as we go tonight.
Chris, before you pass the torch, give out your website, please, and contact info.
Okay, it's logosapologia.org. So www.logosapologia.org.
Awesome. Tom, take it over.
Yeah, hey, great to be on with all of you guys tonight. And Steve, great to be on with you again, too. And Chris, this is a wonderful opportunity, always, of course, a privilege to be on the radio with Steve Quayle and to discuss the various hot topic issues. I don't think we ever hit the bell as loudly as when we're on with Steve Quayle. I think most people know that. And I could add to that history, by the way, that Chris was telling you about. In fact, what's very interesting is that last year I had been feeling compelled, even waking up, dreaming about writing this book on Petrus Romanus. And if you've read my book, Apollyon Rising 2012, you know I only gave one paragraph in one chapter to just mention the fact that this was another one of those things that seemed dated to the year 2012, because at that time I wasn't convinced, that there was anything significant really to it, but there was something happening, and I just can't tell you unless it was just directly an unction from God. This just started coming to me, and I started talking to my wife, my son. We were traveling at the time last year, and I was speaking at these different conferences, and we had gone to the Strategic Perspectives Conference in Idaho, where I spoke for Chuck Missler's event. And during that event, when I wasn't speaking, I was visiting with my son and my wife about this, and decided that I was going to begin doing research and write this book on Petrus Romanus. And I have to tell you, we had that conversation, and it was not 1 hour later, Steve, when I went into my hotel room, and I thought while I was in there I'd check my email, and I had an email from Chris Putnam, who I had grown to respect as a theologian and an apologist over the last couple of years. And in his email he was saying, and he and I don't think had talked about this before then, and in his email he wanted to know if it'd be okay if he used that quote from Apollyon Rising on the prophecy of the popes in a research paper that he was writing, and I couldn't believe it. I emailed him back. I said, you won't believe that just a few moments ago I had decided to write a book about this. Well, anyway, I don't need to go into all the blow-by-blow details, but there did seem to be something very providential about it, and I have to tell you, it's a good thing that God introduced the subject matter that Chris and I would be writing about bite at a time, if you know what I mean, because the truth is, I've never had a project in my life before where it became at one point as concerning to me as this project. And as you know, I've taken on the Freemasons. I went to Washington, D.C., went right into the house of the temple, met with leaders there that gave me 2 coins to keep me from getting killed by the Freemasons. So I've done a lot of this stuff in the past where, some people might have, been apprehensive to do it, but nothing until we started on this project had me a couple of different times looking over my shoulder wondering if we really should go down this road. And I know Chris felt that way a couple of times too, but we both believe that God has given us what I now believe to be the most important research in my life, certainly the most urgent message that I've ever personally delivered. And I say that as a man who's been in ministry over 30 years. I pastored for almost 25 years. I've held executive-level positions in the largest evangelical organizations in the world. I've spoken at very large conferences and to very large radio and television audiences. And I'm telling everybody within the sound of my voice tonight, and also who will listen to this recording later, nothing, nada, not one time during all that time did I work on a project or have a message as important as this latest investigation by myself and my co-author, the theologian and investigative bloodhound Chris Putnam. And that's already being reported on my website, on his blog site, and also, by the way, being reported at newswithviews.com. And I want to encourage people to read the weekly series over there at newswithviews.com, because my friend Paul Walter, that owns that website, has had a lot of struggles in the last year, and yet he has not once stepped backward from being very brave to publish a lot of stuff that other people, except for maybe Steve Quayle, a lot of people won't touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. But anyway, bottom line, let's get to talking about this, because unless people have been buried under a rock around the world, people understand that we've entered 2012 aware now that something is going on at the Vatican. There is a power struggle, and it is boiling to the surface between factions over there inside the Roman Curia, the College of Cardinals. It involves the current Pope, Pope Benedict XVI. It involves his Secretary of State, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. It involves other players that we can discuss during this show and that Chris and I have documented in this 600-page book, 6x9 binding, over 800 authoritative footnotes and images. And we titled it Petrus Romanus, the Final Pope is Here, because, as Chris said, we have, according to an ancient Catholic prophecy, which seems to be unfolding right on schedule, we have reached a moment when the final Pope, more commonly understood by both Catholic prophets and evangelicals as the false prophet of end times biblical fame that gives rise to the Antichrist, he's here. And if our investigation is correct, we could be within 60 days, 90 days, 120 days of the arrival of that assistant to the man of sin that was predicted thousands of years ago to arrive on this date.
Hey, Chris, let me ask you a question, and this is, Tom, great intro. The relevance of this to a lot of people who may not have an understanding of the Catholic Church or may not have an understanding of how this plays into the end time. What Tom has just said, obviously the false prophet, but there's a point that I think most people need to look behind the scenes, even the Catholic believers themselves, at just the, if you will, the arcane and luciferic initiations of, for instance, what Malachi Martin wrote about and others wrote about, and a lot of people have been killed over. Could you kind of briefly and take as much time as you'd like, but share that about the actual enthronement of Lucifer? And if Tom, if you feel you can address it, whoever can address it, I think it's important for people to understand this, because when Jesus was tempted, the devil took him up and set him on, the top of the temple and basically said, look, all these kingdoms will be yours. And there's this misunderstanding in a lot of believers, whether they be Catholics or Protestants, just what really is going on and the throne of power, why it's so necessary, number one, for Lucifer to control the Catholic Church, and number two, to control Jerusalem. So let's go just to the Catholic Church first. Can you kind of encapsulate that for the listeners?
Sure, Steve. It's interesting what you said about with Jesus and the temptation by Satan, because when people read the book, they're gonna find that we approach several different angles of prophecy, and they all kind of come together. And there's a really interesting argument from the historicist interpretation of the book of Revelation, which also speaks to that issue, and maybe we can talk about that more later. But what you mentioned with the enthronement ceremony, now Malachi Martin wrote this book called Windswept House, and it's called a Vatican novel, but if you go and read the interviews or listen to the coast-to-coast interviews that Martin gave at the time that he wrote the book, he called it faction. In other words, it's fiction based on facts. And, he loosely changed some names and a few things, but according to him, in interviews and the things that he said on Coast to Coast, that those things actually did happen. And one of the things that he claims happened was that there was a ritual that occurred simultaneously at the Vatican and in Charleston, South Carolina, where they enthroned Lucifer onto a throne, symbolically, but the idea being that they were creating a future pope, is what it sounded like. I mean, that's the contention that Martin makes, and there's some parts of the book that a lot of people aren't even aware of near the end that Tom and I uncovered. You'll see this quoted all over the internet, is what I'm getting at, about the enthronement ceremony, but most of them only quote the beginning of the book. Like, the whole first chapter of the book goes into the details of it, but at the close of the book, Martin actually does a little recap of it and actually says the purpose of this ritual, which is really a really nasty kind of sex magic sort of thing that I don't even really want to describe in detail, but it involved pedophilia and other things in South Carolina. And I think the idea with this occult ceremony was that they were tied in over a phone line, and these guys acted this ritual out in South Carolina, while simultaneously this group called the Roman Phalanx was in the Vatican, and supposedly there's a magical connection that they have. Now, I don't really understand a lot about that kind of occultism, but I believe that they believe it, and there's something going on there. And it's not the kind of area that I want to spend a lot of time researching, because I just feel dirty when I do it. I'd rather dig into biblical studies and things like that. But
that's why he left all that nastiness to me.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I
describe it.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I want you to address the nastiness, because even in my book, Long Walker, one of the illustrations that was given to my sketch artist, who's a talented man, Brian Snowdy, in my opinion, probably one of the most gifted illustrators on the planet. The ritual that I was, and you guys need to understand this, is that the ritual that I was given to give to my sketch artist, and then it was given back to a high-ranking military general that happened to be at this horrid ceremony where there was child sacrifice and the Annunciation. This is, by the way, after the last pope's death. During his funeral, on the underground Rome labyrinth, and some of the things that were present, including whether people can handle this or not, a live giant. I mean, this was given to me by an active duty general. And guess who was there? Cesar Chavez. And I'm sorry, not Cesar, Hugo. My apologies. I've got Caesar on my mind. Hugo Chavez was there, and he ran out of this ceremony. And when he went to the United Nations, the people, the world rulers, here's what people got to understand. When our Lord Jesus stated that the whole world lies in the evil one, that they were there, and the only man that saw it for what it was Chavez. So the fascinating thing is, what we're talking about, the enthronement of Lucifer, we're talking about child sacrifice, we're talking about the raping of children, and then the slaying of children. It doesn't get any more disgusting. It is a blood sacrifice. It's just like the abortion issue. Abortion is a blood sacrifice to Lucifer. And and I think that people got to understand this. This isn't a quaint intellectualism. This is full-on slaughterism. There's a new word, Tom, slaughterism, in which these people are invoking all the occult powers that they've been given through their ancestral bloodlines and fallen angels and everything else. And I mean, when people just laugh and say, oh, that stuff's not real, this stuff is very real. So if you take what Chris said, Tom, and add whatever you want to add to it, it's critical that people understand this is not just a bunch of good old boys. These are people that have given their power unto the devil, and in welcoming him and enthroning him, they're ready to announce, guess what? Guess who controls the earth? And that's what is the most tragic, I would say, this mind-numbing thing that I know of, as we're being told in the Scripture. You guys in this book are giving basically the key to the lock of understanding how the false prophet, the Antichrist, and all this stuff is going to play out, and most people just don't grasp the lateness of the hour. So, Tom, add to what Chris just said.
Well, I will do that. And in fact, there is so much that is going on right now, today, in the Vatican that is related to the overall conversation concerning what went on in the 1958 conclave, what went on in the 1963 conclave. Was Siri actually elected? Did he have to step aside, according to Malachi Martin, because of an international presence that came in? All of that is covered in this book, but what's beneath the surface of all of that is all of the principal players are back now. The principal players from the conclave of 1950 to 1963, the principal players of the year 2000 Fatima secret cover-up, when they released the so-called Secret of Fatima in June or July of the year 2000, if you look at who the principal players were then, they're the ones that are creating the shakeup in the Roman Curia right now. So as we have time tonight, if we get to a deeper, I think, conversation about what is happening, people will understand this whole enthronement of Lucifer, what happened in 58, what happened in 63, why Malachi Martin targeted 1961, because all the people, the game players then, are the ones now that are in the news, and most people don't know that because they have, well, we'll talk about that in a moment. There is a reason why, before we went on the air, Steve, that I was saying that people should not read our upcoming book, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. They should not read it haphazardly. And I'm warning people right now that they should pray, even for faith, because we don't want people to be afraid. We're not in the fear business. But what I have personally never dealt with a subject matter that as deep as this investigative research, or as troubling as this investigative research, or as timely as this investigative research, because we're seeing playing out right now in the year 2012, most likely, what has been undertaken from the 1950s and 1960s, and that Malachi Martin so bravely wrote about. And it's so what you have is you have a guy like myself who is both a publisher and an investigative researcher. On the other hand, you have Chris Putnam, who is an apologist and a theologian. In addition to that, I hired a private investigator. We contacted the Dane County Sheriff's Department to look into the murder of Father Coons with the question of, was he, Steve, part of what you were just talking about? Was he actually was he a sacrificial victim? Was there something? We definitely know that there was an animal that was mutilated 24 hours exactly before he was killed in the same way. So we can get into all of that if you want. But to answer your question about Malachi Martin and what he said about the enthronement of Lucifer, and to remind people that it was in the 60s, mid-60s, when John Paul the Sixth granted Malachi Martin, who was a high-placed Jesuit priest inside the Vatican, he gave him a dispensation from his duties. Martin moved to New York, and he dedicated himself to writing about what was the term Chris used a moment ago, faction, writing fiction. But what he was really doing was he was telling the world what was going on, and he was trying to do it in a way that he wouldn't wind up getting killed, which some people believe he did anyway, as he was speaking out on issues stemming from the Second Vatican Council, mostly, and other insider accounts of Catholic dogma and geopolitics. He was a member of the Vatican Advisory Council. He was a formidable polyglot. He could speak 17 languages. He was a personal secretary to renowned Jesuit Cardinal Augustine B. He had privileged information pertaining to secretive church and world issues, including the third secret of Fatima, which I want to tie some of this into tonight because it is more important than you might imagine just hearing me say those words, because Martin, if you remember, he spelled out parts of a plan to formally install the dreaded false prophet during a final conclave, but Martin indicated that the third secret of Fatima actually spoke of that final conclave in which Petrus Romanus, the false prophet of biblical fame, would appear. But behind what was going on in the Vatican, Martin believed that this old scheme that the Illuminati, the Alta Vendita, that the Illuminati would slowly invade the ranks of the Vatican hierarchy and literally turn it in basically to a propaganda tool for their own New Age and enlightened ideas. Well, Martin stated that, in fact, that had happened, and that those were the most powerful characters inside the Vatican. That raises questions as well. Malachi Martin also raised questions about Pope John Paul I. You remember, who was elected Pope in 1978, and he died 33 days, which is a Masonic marker. He died 33 days later. And right after he became Pope, he learned of cardinals, bishops, high-ranking prelates that were Freemasons, and he may have been murdered to keep him from exposing those men's plans and or to deter this investigation that he had launched into the Vatican Bank that was connected with Roberto Calvi, who was a Grand Orient Freemason and the chairman of the Ambresano Bank. And this is part of what's in the news right now, because if you look at these poison pen letters that are part of what's right now, being called the VatiLinks scandal, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
And it's unfolding in Rome in the last few weeks. Well, there is a deeper malaise that exists behind those poison pen letters. And by the way, the Vatican has confirmed that those letters are authentic. And on the surface level, they expose this blistering relationship that is between Archbishop Carlo Bagano and the current Secretary of State, Cardinal Bertone, Tarcisio Peter Bertone, Peter the Roman maybe, involving political jockeying and financial deal-making, including charges of chaotic management, corruption, nepotism, cronyism, linked to the awarding of contracts to Bertone's preferred contractors at inflated prices. That's exactly what was going on when John Paul I was going to report on it, and he died 33 days later. So we're talking about mafioso stuff here, right?
Well, absolutely, and bankers hanging under bridges and the whole situation. There's such a thread of deception, but I think it's important even to Protestants. Protestants don't understand, in my opinion, the significance of this third secret of Fatima. By the way, Tom, I was on Coast to Coast I forget, just within a week or two after Malachi Martin had passed away, and I said flat out, he was murdered, okay? And, people took me to task. Well, how can you know that? I said, look, when you got the fingerprints, this is something people need to understand. Occultists enjoy announcing what they're going to do. They enjoy telling you what they're going to do. And then they enjoy, as one guy said, shoving it, and I won't say where, up the non-learned adepts, or basically, and then mocking the Christians for, believing in prophecy, but not even seeing what they tell. Here's what I've been told by he's a dead Illuminist now, but he said, Steve, what's so amazing, even to us, is the fact that the Christians claim, these are his words, not mine, to believe in prophecy, but they don't even believe what they see with their own eyes, let alone the prophecy they claim to believe. And he just laughed. And I said, I got news for you. His name was Tex. I said, look, Tex. I said, that's his real name, by the way. He's dead now. I said, that's not the case with everybody. And he said, do you realize how few people get it? So listen, ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking about tonight is life-impacting, life-threatening. And as Tom said, and I know that Chris would reiterate this is stuff you pray over. This is stuff that the prophets of long ago longed to look into. This is stuff that even though Daniel was allowed to see, he wasn't allowed to write it, in detail. So the thing is, this is as critical as it gets. And so I'm saying that, Tom and Chris, for the benefit of people saying, well, what is all this Catholic stuff? Let me put that question to you, if you don't mind, Tom, real quick. Chris, what does this all really boil down to in the third secret of Fatima? Can you sum it up? Because, look, the denials and, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you this, the third secret of Fatima is real, and it was so not only prophetic but apocalyptic in the revealing of how it all played out. Naturally, if you're being told that you guys are going to usher in the false prophet, you're not going to go out and broadcast that to 1.3 billion of your followers or worldwide. So will you sum up, if you would, Chris Putnam? Will you sum up the third secret of Fatima through all your research? And then, Tom, obviously you want to add to it.
I'll tell you, Steve, I'm skeptical about the third secret of Fatima in one way. And the main thing that I'm skeptical about is that I don't believe that Mary is giving messages to anybody. I think that there's a level of deception going on.
Oh, absolutely. Let me interrupt something. Familiar spirits are familiar and masquerade. I think a good word is masquerade. But I think, and I agree with you, okay? The bottom line is the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. But would you just encapsulate what the end time, if you will, content of the third secret of Fatima is as you understand it? And then, Tom, you, and then I'll throw in whatever 3 cents I have.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. Okay. I mean, I think Tom's got a better idea of what it is, but I'll tell you, my opinion of it is that it was something that the Catholic Church doesn't want to talk about, and that tells you a lot right there.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks louder. I mean, everyone has theories about what it is, and according to Malachi Martin, what they're saying it is now can't be true, because he even gave a certain length of it and things like that don't match up to what the story that the official line that they're giving now. So whatever it is, they're hiding it. And that tells me more than anything that it's not convenient to their theology. It's not convenient to what they want people to think about them. And I think Tom's got a more specific idea of what it contains. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, well, of course, Malachi Martin, and a lot of what he was writing about, he was writing novels, so he would do fancy things. He would change dates and times, but he would also give you just enough to know who he was actually referring to. The other thing I'd like to say for our audience is that we don't set dates. And when we're talking about the year 2012, when we're talking about prophetic utterances, Harold Camping came along this year and last year, 2011, to remind us once again that it's probably historically unwise to set dates for when things are going to occur. But that's not what motivates me with this. There is a concatenation of events pointing towards the year 2012 as an event horizon that has been, for thousands of years from different cultures pointing at this specific period of time, and that's one of the things I do want to talk about. The other thing, though, is that not only do we not set dates, but when interpreting end times signs, you got to be careful about non-canonical sources. And that could include anything from the novels of Malachi Martin to the writings of famous seers, to Nostradamus, to Edgar Cayce, to Jeannie Dixon, to whatever. But having said that, and I'm approaching it this way because, Chris, of your mentioning that you don't buy the Marian apparitions in the sense that you don't believe Mother Mary is appearing to people at particular points in time and giving them revelations. But I think what you, Steve Quayle, all of us would say is that besides divinely appointed Scripture, there have been times when occultic forces also are aware of certain dispensational realities and can make very accurate predictions. And then even God himself, by the way, sometimes uses what we would call unsaved people. That's something that some people, have a hard time wrapping their mind around, but he does do that. He has done that in history. He used Nebuchadnezzar. His dream from the 2nd chapter of Daniel is one of the most central prophecies of all time, one which the most conservative evangelical scholars routinely quote and chart for end-time studies, and that's a prophecy that spans from 600 years before Christ through the second coming of Jesus Christ, and God chose to give that to an arrogant pagan king and then required his holy servant Daniel to interpret it for the narcissistic king. And then, of course, Balaam. Here you got a sorcerer hired by Balak, the Moabite king, who was afraid of the Israelites, And this king sends for the dark wizard Balaam and wants him to prophesy against Israel. And they both live in infamy today, and yet in Numbers 24:17, another of one of the most central prophecies concerning the coming of Christ, in which Balaam prophesied, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And that prophecy was received 1,000 years before Christ from a hostile source, and yet it is one of the most well-respected prophecies concerning the coming of Jesus Christ. So what do we take from this? There are times where it can be, something is either divinely inspired, or it is demonically inspired, or it is God using an unsaved source. Imagine that. Imagine that. But God uses whatever he wants to use, doesn't he? To tell the world what is coming. And I remember, by the way, when I was a pastor, somebody came to me one day and they asked me why God kept using this one person in the church who they didn't feel was as qualified as they were, and the answer came to me instantly. And I said, it's because they're willing to do it. They'll open their mouth and let God speak, and you're not. So we see that God sometimes uses these most unlikely characters, situations, to get his message across. And so now the big question is, was that also true of the Fatima secrets? Now, we don't have to believe it. The point is, deep inside the Vatican, they do believe it. It is a sanctioned, prophetic series of utterances that the Church has sanctioned. They have canonized the children who gave those prophecies. They deeply and truly believe it, but there's strong evidence that they have covered up whatever the final prophecy actually is, and we'll talk more about that in a moment if you want to. But the question still goes back to what you said earlier, Chris. Not only would it maybe be true of the Fatima secrets, but the prophecy of the popes. You said a moment ago you could illustrate how accurate the prophecy of the popes has been for at least the last 500 years, something higher than an 80 or 90% success ratio, which is better than any prophets I know today. Where did that come from? Where does that inspiration come from? Is it demonic? Was it divine? That's the question, but no matter what anybody believes in that regard, we've reached the end of this Catholic prophecy. And the very next pope is Petrus Romanus, the final pope on the list. And events around the world right now are developing in support of the idea that the Antichrist and the false prophet are here. And that's what this new book, Petrus Romanus, it's 600 pages and 800 authoritative footnotes, is an investigation and conclusion of that startling fact. And then let me add one last thing, and I apologize. I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. You guys just get me anointed, I guess. One final thing. People, well, never mind. Go ahead.
Well, Chris, here's one of the questions I think that, and I'm in total agreement. You know, what a lot of people don't recognize is the fact that, Tom, I want to just build on something. Even when you've got the Sibyls, and when you have the Greek prophetesses, and you have all of the fallen angel influence, when you had even Herod being worried about the birth of the Messiah, and so worried, killing all the children, Rachel weeping for her children, for they are not, and all those things. I think the thing that people have got to understand is there are specific, and I don't even like the word dispensation, so I call them this. I call them locked into eternity points at which God, in essence, this whole thing moves according to his will. He uses the wickedest and the vilest of men to fulfill his purposes, and God knows that we're seeing that in living color, and we're seeing that in absolute the expression of the political scene in this world. But also the thing is that people have got to understand that when we're talking about the Scripture, God's Word, the declaration, you know, you left out Balaam's donkey, okay? I would prefer to sit down in a stable with a talking donkey that's at least smart enough to see an angel than most of that, and this is a biblical term, dumbasses that preach 20-minute sermons on golf games, okay, and that is a biblical term. And I think the thing that people have got to understand here is that the testimony of Jesus, Spirit of Prophecy, and I think concurrent, Chris, with what you and Tom are writing about, is look at the hatred towards the name of Jesus. Look at the intrigue that's coming on, so anything can be done and anywhere, anytime, any place. But they wouldn't try and denigrate or disavow Jesus Christ unless they knew, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, they are convinced they can defeat Jesus. They acknowledge he's coming back, by the way, but they believe that somehow the yielding of God's creation, especially mankind, sold out to Lucifer, will join and form, if you will, a hybrid, and a transhumanist is a better word, that will somehow make war on God and win. So I want you, if you would, Chris, to just spell out, as you have. Some people say, well, what's the big deal about St. Malachi or his prophecy, and how do we know it's true, and blah 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 blah, and these guys aren't really, people even claim whether he was really saved or not saved. The point is that what as your studies have indicated to you, what is the reason that you say, you know what, this guy's been firing on all 8 cylinders? Can you kind of give a brief overview of his prophecy and how it has been accurate as you see it?
Sure. The thing that that Tom was talking about is an argument that I used and I published on my website about Balaam, about Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, these things are demonstrably true. So we can't say biblically that only certain ordained prophets have the future, because obviously Balaam predicted the Bethlehem star, and that's probably what led the Magi to see Jesus. And so there is a biblical precedent
absolutely
for prophecies coming from strange sources, and prophecy in general is just really strange. I mean, even if you look at some of the ways that Matthew will quote the Old Testament and say it was fulfilled in Jesus, it's just really odd when he talks about he will come out of Egypt from Hosea. I mean, if you go read the Hosea passage, you would never consider that a prophecy when you first saw it. So, I mean, prophecy is weird. And, that's one thing that we have to accept, and that's why it's good to be somewhat flexible in your views about how the end times play out and things like that, because it's not always cut and dry. But one thing with the prophecy of the popes, I mean, the thing that grabbed you right off the bat, and that's just undeniable, is that if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, in chapter 17, it talks about the city on 7 hills, the 7 heads or 7 mountains where the woman sit of, and the mountains. This is Rome. All scholars recognize that he was talking about Rome in chapter 17 and Mystery Babylon, and it gets destroyed. Well, obviously, you look at the prophecy of the popes, and it has this apocalyptic ending on it. In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep during many tribulations, and when they're finished, the city on 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. And that little codex on the end there, it matches Revelation 17, and that right there is compelling to me, enough to want to look into the prophecy, and because if that's true, then we really are right up against it. And do I know for sure that we are? No, I don't, but I suspect that we are. And the reason why I say that is that when I first started investigating this Malachi prophecy of the popes, I did pray. I mean, honestly, I thought about backing out of the project at first, because I'm thinking, this thing's kind of dubious. I mean, it's a Catholic prophecy. I mean, it's not biblical. Here I am. I'm just getting out of seminary. I'm gonna discredit myself. I had these fears. And I prayed and I asked God, help me to see through this thing. So I started with a really skeptical attitude, and I started looking into it. Now, the first, people, I'm going to assume that most of the listeners know a little bit about it. If you don't, I would suggest maybe just go look at the Wikipedia page or something on it. But you know,
by the way, spell it for people, because I am getting emails. What? Some people who are listening to us, we all know what we're talking about, but they don't. So tell them what to look up under Wikipedia, if you would.
Just look up the Malachi, M-A-L-A-C-H-Y, Prophecy of the Popes. There's a pretty good Wikipedia article on it, and what you'll find is it's 112 Latin phrases. Okay, and you know it goes back to like 1139, I believe, and you know, supposedly Saint Malachi had a vision, and he saw, you know, the history of the papacy basically, and he gave a little Latin phrase for each pope until the end of time. And you know, the big deal is that there's only one left on the list. But you know, there's a whole controversy about the prophecy. Now, most scholars don't really believe it was Malachi, and I've done a lot of detailed work on what part of the prophecy is genuine and what part's not. Now, I have a pretty good, solid case that part of the prophecy is a forgery, or actually it was kind of created after the fact. But there's a really good case that a lot of it is not and is a real prophecy. And I can get into more detail about that maybe in the second hour. But, you know, right now, I'll just tell you that when I first started looking at it, I read some of the skeptical research by some of the scholars, and you know, but the thing that I couldn't deny is that there's a published copy of this prophecy that's widely distributed. Everyone knows about it. That was published in 1595. Okay, so in 1595, there's no doubt that the prophecy that we have today was in print, and we have copies of that.
Chris, your mic went down.
It did?
Yes,
yeah, you're really hard to hear, Chris.
Okay.
Move your mic closer to your mouth.
Huh. How about now?
Yes.
It's getting a little bit better.
All right. 1595, we have, you know, a solid copy of the prophecy that is undeniable. So anything that's fulfilled after 1595, no one can really argue against or say, you know, was manufactured. And I mean, if you look at some of the more recent fulfillments, they're enough to really compel you. And one of the ones that really got me was the one, it's religio depopulata. Now, that in Latin, basically that means religion depopulated, okay? And what happened during that time, during that papacy, is that we had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, okay? And you had millions of people leave the Catholic Church. Now, what are the odds that, you know, that could be a coincidence? That's a very specific prophecy. It was during the reign of Benedict the 15th, from like in 1914 is when it started. So you have the worldwide spread of communism. You have Stalin, you know, putting people in the gulags, mostly Christians and church leaders. So you see religion literally depopulated in a major way. Okay, so we have a copy of this from 1595 written down that predicts this, and it lands right at the right time, right at this time, and it predicted it. And it just, that right there was the one that really got my attention, and I just couldn't walk away seeing that prediction. And then when you start to dig in a little more, like the one for John Paul II is quite amazing. It talks about from the midst of the moon, and it turns out that he not only did he was born during an eclipse, he was buried during another eclipse, and his prophecy is from the midst of the moon, and it's one of the most amazing fulfillments are these ones that you just can't have humans manufacturing.
Yeah, and you know, I would add to that, we provide, Chris and I both worked on the beginning of this book together in providing the history behind Malachi O'Morgair, the legend, why this prophecy was attributed to him. We try to be very fair in the sense that we also investigate some of the controversy around the prophecy that really does kind of date to 1595. And what it appears is that whether it was Malachi or Morgare, another person, and some people, by the way, believe Nostradamus is actually the true author of the prophecy of the popes. But whoever the true prophecy of the popes was, that prophecy was hidden inside the Vatican. It was kept in their archives for, 400 plus years. And then it was published in the 1500s in Lignum Vitae. But there was reasons why it was published, and there is strong evidence that why it was published and how it was used at the time was that the insiders in the Vatican had reverence for the prophecy, and somebody was using it to try to manipulate the conclave to elect a particular pope that they wanted elected. And so they changed the prophecy to try to make it look like, and Chris can tell us who his name was, but this particular pope, they wanted, I almost said Simonelli, but that's not his name. But
Simon Selly?
Yeah, they wanted him to be elected, so they altered the prophecy to try to make it look like he was supposed to be the guy elected because the conclave would have respect for this ancient prophecy. It didn't work out. He wasn't elected. And unfortunately, what it means is that pre-1595, we can't have any faith that this is the original document. In fact, there's strong evidence that he altered whoever did this altered a significant amount of the prophecy. But it's kind of irrelevant because the prophecy of the popes from 1595 and forward has an entirely different feel to it, and since it was published at that time, it probably represents that portion of the actual original document, whether it was Malachi or Morgare, Nostradamus, or somebody pseudonymously. Sorry,
Tom. Tom, let me interrupt you guys. And this is all good stuff and necessary stuff, but let me just give you a feel for how some people can't separate. Here's one from a guy in Hamburg, Germany. We're not taking questions, but here's the number one thing that people can't understand. Even people that are close to me don't get this. That he said, why do you guys give these people credibility? He's saying 2012 is a Mayan prophecy. I have an answer for these guys. Petrus Romanus is a Catholic prophecy. What's next? Should we look to Nostradamus for answers? No.
Yeah. Well, let me answer.
And I want you guys to deal with that, and then I have an answer for that. Okay.
Well, let me answer first, and then you build on it. Why would we proceed to discuss the prophecy of the popes and other issues related to things like the year 2012, which has been most publicly identified with the end of the Mayan long count calendar precession cycle? The answer is that we are doing this precisely because this book, Petrus Romanus, the final pope is here, is intended to unveil not just what Bible scholars believe about the end times, but also what occultists are convinced of and what they are dedicated to fulfilling. And that goes to the way Washington, D.C. is laid out, the way the Vatican is laid out, the way this next conclave, which will probably be happening maybe even as soon as April, these people are operating from a belief system, and they intend to fulfill ancient prophecies, whether they were inspired by God or not. That's what we're doing. So extra-biblical prophecies, by such as the Maya, the Cumae Sibyl, the prophecy of the popes, these things were sometimes astonishingly accurate. Occult power may be providing supernatural perception that is going to lead to a time of great deception. And don't forget that in addition to the examples we gave earlier about Nebuchadnezzar and so on, Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses in the Old Testament. They had supernatural power. The Pythian priestess in the New Testament knew that Paul, Peter, that they were preaching the gospel of Christ. How did she know that? And that God had sent Paul. You have the demons that cried out of the homosexual men in the valley of Gadara to Jesus, "Art thou come hither to torment us before the time?" And that word kairos in Greek means a definite period of time, an awaited epoch. These are all facts that are especially germane to eschatology, to end-time events, that we are approaching a juncture in time, an important moment in time, and it isn't just preachers preaching on Sunday trying to interpret biblical prophecy. There are occultists who are very much devoted and very much inspired by demonic forces that have a plan. And if we don't bring these issues into the light, then the church will just continue going along, like Steve was saying a moment ago, preaching their happy little "send me your money and God will give you $100" sermons, and he that now withholdeth will quit withstanding, and times of darkness can come forward. There is a concatenation of events right now from thousands of years of pagan cultures, all of them pointing to the year 2012. Wouldn't a person even be curious? I am. I'm curious as an evangelical scholar wannabe. I'm curious. Why? There are so many pagan cultures, including our own United States government and our prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, pointing to the year 2012, in which there is going to be the arrival of two men. Did you know that even the Mayan prophets right now are prophesying that the year 2012 will be visited by two great prophets, speakers, whatever you want to put on them, that are going to appear at the conclusion of this calendar? So there's an event horizon. And if you look at the example of the accuracy of the prophecy of the popes, whether it's you could look, we could go through that, and I won't. But if you want us to, we could get.
That's not necessary, Tom, because again, here's the thing. I think what people are missing is the big picture. If you want to take on the attitude of this, Chris, I'm not picking on you, but I'm answering your email. If you take on the reason that I wrote every single book I've written, and I'm up to 10, Tom, and I know you're close to that, and Chris, you're just getting launched in this world, but it's because the church would not deal. Jesus himself, the Word of God says that God's people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, not because he doesn't present it, but because they reject it. And I've had two of the most immature and absolutely, these are people that listen. Here's the thing. We are to study to show ourselves approved unto God, rightly dividing the truth. There are people that say, well, how could the Magi, being magicians, astrologers, God's down on astrology, how could they go and give God, the Son of God, gold, frankincense, and myrrh? I said, simple. They were smarter. They weren't listening to Christian TV, obviously, and they weren't bringing Federal Reserve notes, IOUs, and collateralized debt obligations. The point is that here's what I want to say this in the context. Every single source of occultism, hidden knowledge, all the rituals of death, rituals of evil are absolutely spawned by the fallen angels and their progeny. It was the fallen angels producing the giants, the mighty men of renown, that basically taught mankind all this forbidden knowledge. And the deal is some of that knowledge was sealed up. But now, it's amazing. I deal with Christians who believe in UFOs, but then they want to take me on for, because I'm using extra biblical sources. The book of Enoch, for instance, and Tom, you and I have done some, in my opinion, the best, and this isn't flattering us, it's because God was showing us something to show to the rest of the world that, look, the whole basis of the book of Enoch is the prophetic future, but how the, if you will, the fallen angels, the angels, they kept not their first estate and all this stuff, and now we see Hollywood worshiping, magnifying, openly flaunting in our face, and people listen to that, some of that, and I can't say the word, but some of that fecal music, and then telling me, or you, or Chris, that, why are we giving pagans their due? We're not. We're sharing the truth, and this is something that some of you need to grow up on. The truth is the truth. Just because God uses you in one direction, it doesn't mean, and it means the same thing for me, that we all have all the answers. But what we're trying to tell you, how it's going to play out. I would think that most Christians listening to this who are still struggling over Nostradamus and the Mayans, let me tell you why the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar, by the way, Tom, I don't know if you've heard me, I don't call it the Mayan calendar. I call it basically hate notes from fallen angels, okay? They know the workings of the stars. God showed Enoch. He took them to heaven. If you have a problem with you not going to heaven, take it up with God. In the book of Giants, we know exactly where all the genetic manipulation came from. Is it extra-biblical? Yeah. But most of the Scripture, even in the New Testament and the Old Testament, people read it such a superficial way, and when they start going into a word study, then they understand, hey, the word for the dead isn't just somebody who's kicked the bucket. Those are my slang terms, not accurate, Chris, but just kick the bucket. The word is Rephaim. So the thing is that we're in a. Can I say something? And this is don't get mad at Tom or Chris for this, but some of you have to. Oh, I can't say it that way. You have to grow up, you have to mature, and you have to quit looking. You take this stuff to the Lord Jesus. You try the spirits. And look, it's just like people say, somebody called my store today and said, oh, you must be a Catholic. No. I admire the Catholics because they stand up against abortion, against the things that I'm against. And it's like this. Are all Christians who call themselves Christians? Jesus put that into perspective. Are all Catholics Christians? No. Are all evangelical Christians? No. There are Christians. There are believers. Let me change the word. There are believers in Jesus in all the denominations. There are followers of Jesus. But the point is that we're trying to, and I tell you guys, I get frustrated at this point, so forgive me, but we're trying to help people see the roadmap of their future. Every headline in the world is talking about assassinations of popes. Everybody is talking about who the last pope is. And I'm not talking Tom and Chris and just their book. I'm talking it's out there. And when you control 1.3 billion people's lives or more, you have a lot of control. So when Satan, take it up with the Lord, Satan says all the kingdoms of the world are his, do you really think that anybody's exempt from his influence? The point that I'm trying to make to everybody out there, Tom and Chris, is that they need to listen with an open heart, and never have we said, this is the thus saith the Lord. We're saying this is how it's playing out. So we got to get to the nitty-gritty, guys.
Well, and furthermore, Steve, again, it doesn't matter if a listener buys into the prophecy of the popes or they don't. Starting out, I didn't. Chris Putnam didn't. That isn't even what this book is about. What the project is about is that it is very obvious that some very powerful people in the Roman Curia, in the Roman government, do believe in it, and they are approaching the conclave that is going to elect Petrus Romanus, who the prophet of that prophecy foresaw as the coming of a pope who is going to be under the influence of Satan and is going to help give rise to the Antichrist. There are very powerful people in the world who do believe that prophecy. That's the point. And they are committed, they are dedicated to seeing the fulfillment of that prophecy. Now, when you combine that with prophecy, for instance, from the Zohar. Here you have a prophecy that's 600 years old. It's inside a collection of books written in medieval Aramaic actually 700 years old, I should say. And it's in the Hebrew Kabbalah, the Zohar, that is basically a running commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible. But in addition to interpreting Scripture, the Ve'era section includes the signs heralding Mashiach, or the coming of the Messiah, and the fascinating date for the appearance of the Jewish Messiah, who to you and I would be the Antichrist, since they rejected Jesus, and the Bible, New Testament, tells us they're going to accept a false Messiah. The date for his appearance, again, is set in the Zohar in late 2012. You know, Steve, that J.R. Church, a Prophecy in the News, called my office a couple years ago, and he led us through that part of the Zohar that we then published in Apollyon Rising 2012 that revealed what the 2012 research community had never seen before until that time, and that was that the time of Jacob's trouble, the Great Tribulation, which some Catholic scholars are saying begins with the election of Petrus Romanus, that is going to commence, according to this ancient Jewish text, in the year 2012. And furthermore, what's intriguing is that the prophecy in the Zohar sounds almost identical to the prophecy of the popes. It talks about how the kings of the earth will be gathered in Rome. It sounds very much like they're there during a papal conclave, and they are killed when fiery stones or missiles from the sky. That's what some Catholic prophets actually believe the meaning there is. Falls upon the city of Rome, and the city of Rome is destroyed. So you have a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy, you have a 700-year-old Jewish prophecy, both of them saying that the false prophet and the Antichrist are arriving in the year 2012. Why did those occult sources believe that? And again, go back to those demons that came out of the homosexual men that ran up to Jesus and said, "Why are you come hither to torment us before the time?" These spirits know something. They know something about, I know you don't like the word dispensations, but they know something about what's another alternative word, dispensations, times, epochs, important periods in time. The demons know something about it. And why are these demonic influences in all these cultures around the world, why have they been for thousands of years, looking forward to the year 2012? You have a false Messiah predicted in a 700-year-old Jewish prophecy to appear in 2012. Similarly, you have a 900-year-old prophecy of the popes that looks to be unfolding in parallel fashion to provide Petrus Romanus in 2012. To that you could include the Mayan calendar, ends in 2012 with the return of their flying dragon god, Kukulkan. The Aztec calendar ends in 2012, and their flying dragon god, Quetzalcoatl, returns. The Cherokee Indian calendar ends in 2012, and their flying rattlesnake god returns. Also, according to the ancient Mayan inscription, and you know that there was a second confirmation of this found in Mexico here about a month and a half ago, that in 2012 the Mayan underworld god Bolan-Yakteku is going to return. You have the Hindu Kali Yuga calendar that ends in 2012 at the conclusion of the age of the male demon. You have the conclusion of the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, the Kume Sibyl's prophecy, pointing to the coming of Antichrist. And thanks to, again, investigative bloodhound, as I called him. I hope that's not an offense, Chris, because I mean it as a compliment. Thanks to him, we now know that, and these through college materials, university materials, that 260 years ago, the leader of the First Great Awakening in America, Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, famous preacher, one of the most important original philosophical theologians, one of the greatest early intellectuals. He held a prophetic view based on the 1,260 days that the woman will be in the wilderness in Revelation 12:6, and he interpreted those days as the years that the true church would be oppressed by the papists, the popes. This is what Jonathan Edwards believed, and he considered that one of the most likely times for the end of the reign of Antichrist would be 1,260 years after AD 756, which was the acceding of temporal power of the popes, which would place, Steve, the arrival of the Antichrist potentially in 2012 with the end of his covenant with Israel, the midst of the week, the beginning of the real tribulation, the part where the trumpets and vial judgments are poured out in their severity, in the year 2016. And this list goes on and on. In 2012, we elect a new president. In 2012, the United Nations gets a new leader. In 2012, Petrus Romanus is likely going to materialize during a final conclave. 130 years after Jonathan Edwards, in 1878, Reverend William J. Reed did the same thing that Jonathan Edwards did to try to establish a date when the papal system would come to an end, and he set it for the year 2012. So what I'm telling you is there is something very strange that has been going on for thousands of years, and what interests me is why are all of these occultic forces in these disparate nations around the world and throughout time, why have they looked to the year 2012 as the arrival of the false prophet and the Antichrist, and then couple that with what is happening in biblical prophecy? Look at the Bible. Look at Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Timothy, and look at the signs they give us. They're signs in nature. famine, earthquakes, plagues, signs in the heaven. And there's nobody that could deny right now that in the last decade we've had more of all of the above than in any other time in history. They also provided signs in society. They talked about lawlessness, violence, immorality, selfishness, hedonism, rebellion, despair. And look at your world today and tell me that this isn't happening. They talked about spiritual signs, apostasy in the professing church. They talked about political signs, with Arabs being hostile towards Israel and Russia being a menacing presence towards Israel. They talked about the reunification of Europe. They talked about a movement towards a one-world economy. They talked about technological signs, the genetics revolution. They talked about accelerating signs, population explosion, increases in knowledge. They talked about Israel regathering as a nation. So somebody tell me why, if you look at biblical prophecy and then look at what these occultic forces have been doing, somebody tell me why it wouldn't be reasonable to believe that a game is afoot. And I'm telling you, we conclude that it is, and we provide information in Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope Is Here, that if you're not prayed up when you read this book, you better not read it.
Absolutely. Tom, I wanted to add something to what you said and kind of to feed off of what Steve was getting at before. Before, when I was talking about the prophecy of the popes in a couple of these, I think I misspoke. On John Paul, the phrase is from the labor of the sun, okay? Now, one thing that I looked at when I was investigating this prophecy is that I really, I wanted to prove it to myself one way or the other, whether there was anything to it. Was it really predicting the future? Now, in science, we learn about a thing called falsification. When you make a risky prediction, something that's so risky that it could falsify the whole thing. Now, that one that I mentioned before, religion depopulated. Now, you think about it. During that time period, the church could have experienced remarkable growth, or nothing at all could have happened. And, if that had happened, it would have falsified that prophecy. And that didn't happen. Instead, we saw the most devastation the church has ever experienced happened during those years. Okay, that's a major fulfillment. And that was a risky prediction. Okay, this one about from the labor of the sun is really unusual because there's no way that you could even fake this. John Paul II was born during the eclipse of the sun. Okay, and then he ended up being buried during an eclipse of the sun. And I went to NASA's website and verified both of the eclipses. And there's just no way that they could set up the burial maybe, but there's no way they could set up his birth. So, those kind of things. Now, there's several of those kind of fulfillments in the prophecy, and you can read about those in the book, but, those kind of things authenticated it to me where I had to take it seriously and just couldn't just dismiss it.
Right. Well, you could take the last four popes, John Paul VI, who reigned from the 1960s through the 1970s, and the prophecy of the popes describes him as Flos Florum, flower of flowers, which clearly matched John Paul VI's heraldry. His coat of arms included three fleur de lis, the flower symbol used by the French monarchy. You could take the next pope, John Paul I. The prophecy of the popes described him as de mediate lunae, from the midst of the moon. And he's famous for the shortest papacy in history. He only lived 33 days as a pope. It's widely believed that he was poisoned, and we could go into that later if we want to. But as for his motto in the prophecy of the popes, John Paul I was born in the Diocese of Beluna. Luna is Latin for the moon, and ascended to the papacy August 26, 1978, on the precise day of a half moon in its waning phase, which corresponds perfectly to his midst of the moon. John Paul II, which you just mentioned, and even Pope Benedict XVI. The prophecy of the popes described him as Gloria Olivae, the glory of the olive, and he was born on the feast of Saint Benedict. He took the name as Benedict, and the olive branch, of course, a symbol of the Benedictine monks, and that is seen as a very accurate fulfillment of the prophecy. And some also even connect that to the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and the end times. But of course, it all still brings us back to the last entry in the prophecy of the popes and the final pope, Peter the Roman, and the statement once again that whether somebody buys into this or don't, I sure didn't in the beginning, you sure didn't in the beginning, but it really doesn't even have, you know what, let me let the audience know The reason that we chose this prophecy really was only to launch a larger question, and that is the false prophet and the Antichrist in the world today? And that's where the real evidence in this book is going to shock some people. And when you look at the political maneuverings, earlier I was talking about the College of the Cardinals and Carlo Vagano and this whole thing about the VatiLeaks, but at a deeper level, beneath what the public is seeing right now in the Vatican in the VatiLeaks scandal, Vagano's letters indicate that he was prematurely removed from the office of Secretary General of the government of the Vatican City State and given the job of nuncio, or the ambassador to the United States, specifically to remove him from Rome to the United States so that a power alignment could occur within the Vatican, inside the Vatican government. Supporters for Bertone could gather around him. I'm not the only one saying that. The best Vatican watchers are saying this. Most Vatican experts agree that the struggle that you're seeing right now in the media is the tip, the tiniest tip of a very large iceberg where, mostly unseen by the world, there is a deeper internal campaign right now that involves Machiavellian manipulation, maneuverings, what Reuters News called a sort of mutiny of the Monsignors, that is playing out behind the scenes between Secretary of State Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, who may wind up being Petrus Romanus, and his supporters, versus rebels that have the tacit backing, by the way, not of Vagano, but of a former Secretary of State, Cardinal Angelo Sodano, who is an influential power broker in his own right, and a veteran diplomat who served under the late Pope John Paul II for 15 years. And Steve, Chris, and Bruce, this is where things get really intriguing, because if Sodano is truly behind these leaked papers that are coming out of the Secretariat of State in the Vatican, if he's behind the power struggle to undermine the papal possibilities for Cardinal Bertone, then something extraordinary really is happening with and between the original Fatima cover-up conspirators, Cardinal Ratzinger, who is now today known as Pope Benedict XVI, Cardinal Bertone, and Cardinal Sodano. And if you, I don't even know when we're going to take a break, but if you want to discuss what we can say about that, we can provide some eye-opening background on the Fatima year 2000 issue, in which all of these players who were involved then in what many Catholic priests then and now believe was central to paving the way for the coming of the Antichrist and his false prophet of end times biblical fame, Petrus Romanus, the last pope on the list. That's really what this book is about, and that's really the extraordinary conclusions that are made in this research that also happens to be connected to this 900-year-old Catholic prophecies and other prophecies that all seem to be coming to a cohesion in the year 2012. And extraordinarily, by the way, there's one thing that we have to talk about tonight, and this is the tour de force of the book. This is absolutely, in my opinion, one of the greatest things that I ever have had the privilege of publishing, and it was found by Chris Putnam, God's Bloodhound, and it has to do with a French codex written by a French Jesuit priest, mathematician, and codebreaker by the name of René Thibault. And we have got to talk about that tonight and let Chris talk about this discovery and what it means to our book, because then you're getting it from the horse's mouth. You're getting it from a highly placed Jesuit priest who was an academic among the Roman hierarchy, and what he had to say about the coming of the final pope on this list illustrates very much what at least some in the among the Jesuit order, among the Black Pope, among the papacy, among the College of Cardinals of Curia, what some of them truly do believe about the prophecy of the popes, and therefore how it might affect the upcoming conclave to vote in the successor for Benedict XVI.
Hey, Tom, one of the other things I want you guys to address, and we're going to take a break in just a few minutes, and we've got, 3 hours still or close to it. The thing that I think that most people are losing track of, especially Christians or people who are at least favorable to the Christian ethic, is that you've got a man now, you've got the Iran, which was the most powerful, as defined in the Bible, principality and power, the Prince of Persia, if you will, getting ready to unleash, and this is something everybody's missing. This is not, you guys, just politicking between Israel and Tehran. This is the absolute annunciation, if you will, from the Prince of Persia speaking through Ahmadinejad. He's the man that gets enveloped in the green fog, if you will, that if it's necessary to bring about the global caliphate, which means the rule of what we would call the Antichrist over the world. It's interesting that everything in the United States politics is favoring now Christianity, biblical Christianity is mocked and everything else. But, Tom, the thing that it's astonishing to me is that you've got all the stuff you have put on your website, I put on my website, all the people I've interviewed, all the things I've talked about. And, Chris, right now we have, if you will, all of America's foreign policy is to install, if you will, take away the, quote, dictators that we put in the first place, and now install, if you will, the mindset, or the individuals who have the mindset, that all the world will be ruled by Islam. Now, they believe in their Imam Mahdi, okay? They believe that. And you've got the situation, Tom, and I don't know if anybody's ever addressed this, maybe you have, but you've got the fight, Chris, between the Islamic expectation, or their eschatology, and, if you will, the Christendom/Catholic outlook. And then you've got, obviously, the book of Revelation coming into play, and it involves it all. So let's take a break. When we come back, I'd like you guys to address that, because, Tom, here's the thing. Your book is laying out, you guys' mutual effort is laying out, hello, look at these are my words, look at the headlines, look at all the documentation, look at everything we've discovered, and yet right now, okay, Christians will fight us on our trying to get their attention, but there's the whole world of the universal caliphate unfolding before their eyes, and Ahmadinejad really believes what he believes, and obviously the uproar in the world right now is you're going to see, just like Albert Pike, Giuseppe Mazzini's letter, the bottom line is you are seeing the world of Islam, the world of Christianity, and Judaism put into a war footing to destroy every one of those three groups to bring in Lucifer. It's written, it's stated, absolutely immoral dogmas. Albert Pike said, we worship Lucifer. And we're telling people that not only do the Masons claim that, the high-ranking ones, but now we've got basically the control of fighting, or the vesting for control of the Vatican for Lucifer, and then you've got the whole world of Islam. It's amazing to me, and yet it's astonishing to me that people can't put that together. Tom, can we take,
gentlemen, let's take a break.
Let's take a break.
Before we do, would each of you gentlemen please give out your contact information, and let me just say, for those just coming in, what a program tonight. We're talking about the final Pope, Petrus Romanus. We've got Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, and Chris Putnam on. I'll start with you, Steve. Give out your contact info, please.
Well, I sure don't have a heavenly address at this point, but thank the Lord. But my earthly address is Steve Quayle, QUAYLE.com. My email is info@stevequayle.com.
Tom?
Well, sure, RaidersNewsUpdate.com, and they can click on the contact link over there if they need to email me.
Tom, where do people order the book, Petrus Romanus, the Final Pope?
This book is not available in print yet. I have to say this, however, it's already listed in the top 100 hot new releases at Amazon.com, and it won't even be in print for at least 6 more weeks. So there is an extraordinary amount of interest. I've never had a book that is getting this kind of response this early, given the fact that it's almost 2 months before it'll even be in print. And we're very happy about that because we believe that this message is very, very important. So what I would people can go to prophecyofthepopes.com, and they can watch it over there. They can follow the weekly series at RaidersNewsUpdate.com, newswithviews.com. They can go over to Chris Putnam's blog site. Chris will be sometime tonight, evidently, he's going to be posting I think it might be part of the French Codex by René Thibault. I'm not exactly sure, but he can explain that to us after the break and give us his website again, and people can find out more about it over there, too.
Tom, let me ask you also, will you all be releasing the book in Kindle or ebook form as well?
Because of our contract with Amazon and with Prophecy in the News, and I should say our agreement with Prophecy in the News, Southwest Radio Church, and some other ministries, the book will be in print first for the first 90 days, and then it'll be available in Kindle.
Okay, and if someone would like to get on the list, can they pre-order by calling a phone number or anything like that?
Well, they can pre-order at Amazon right now, of course. They can also just sign up to be notified when the book is released. And let me say, if for anybody who cares, there might be a strong advantage to them to go to prophecyofthepopes.com, and you'll see down on the right-hand side, lower on the page, a place where you can sign up to be notified when the book is released. This could be important because we have plans right now to release what we are calling the Intelligence Briefing DVD, which is going to have dozens of out-of-print books. It's going to have the French Codex by René Thibault, all 200 pages or whatever it is long. It's going to have a rough English translation from the French that Chris Putnam did. We paid to have the book professionally scanned so that a person can easily take and highlight parts out of it and use, like, Google's interpreter to translate it from French into English. We're going to provide that. We're going to provide a lot of out-of-print books and other kind of documents on that DVD, but that will only be available through Chris Putnam or Raiders News Update or Survivor Mall, Amazon, the rest of them. They're not going to have that DVD, and there is just a huge amount of resources that we are going to place on that Intelligence Briefing DVD because we want people to have all of these resources. Furthermore, later on in this broadcast, we can also have Chris tell us how he, again, through Yale University, tracked down the so-called lost book that Hogue, in his book on the Final Pope, had said was lost forever to history, but we tracked it down. We got a copy of it. So there's just some extraordinary, actually, accomplishments in this book, and we want to make all of those resources available to anybody that buys the book from us. We're going to make that available to them free, which will have, by the time it's all said and done, it's going to be a very large value of material that we're going to give away.
Awesome. And Chris, give out your contact information, please. Chris Putnam.
Certainly. It's Logos Apologia, so it's www.logosapologia.org. And, I have reserved a special post that I'm going to drop on that website in the next hour that is really, it's one of the key parts of the Prophecy of the Popes from René Thibault's book that points to 2012. So all the things that Tom we're talking about, that all these 2012 prophecies that come together, this is one of the primary pieces of evidence from the Prophecy of the Popes that pins 2012 as the year for the final Pope, and it's going to be published live on the web during the next hour just for this show.
Awesome, folks. We're going to take about a 5-minute break and be back with more from Steve Quayle, Tom Horman, Chris Putnam. Stand by.
You're listening to the Omega Man Radio Network.